I chat regularly with Brian Clark, who's obviously, very, very close to Brian Adams. Um, Obviously, Crush joins and Demolition turns into a trio. Um, how did that change the chemistry, and how was it working with Brian, who was obviously pretty new to the industry at that point?
Well, Brian, and funny you mentioned Brian Clark. We just saw him at WrestleCon. He's a good friend of
He
ours.
gets around, doesn't he? Yeah, good lad.
Yeah, very, very good friend. And I met him years ago and here in Georgia, and we were close friends. But Brian Adams, I had already been approached to do an agent's position, and they were going to phase me out, and I was going to work in the office. So Brian Crush came in, and Crush was a great guy, but he was what we call green, inexperienced, but he was willing to learn, of course. And one of the big things that Demolition never did is we never flubbed up on our interviews. One of the things that we did, we first take, and it was set. And Brian hadn't been used to that pressure, because now he goes from a small territory out in Oregon to world stage, and he was a little nervous, and he made a couple mistakes in his interviews. Of course, the guys that are in the area listening are getting all over him. Demolition doesn't make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. Well, now he's even more self-conscious, and he'd make another mistake, but he didn't, he didn't mean to. And I think that wore on him a little bit. But he, as far as being a competitor and wanting to learn, he did. He was fun to be with. I just think that, and Barry might add to this, it's hard to be in the main event and all that pressure on you and then be a little nervous too. And I think that wore on him a little bit. Wouldn't you say, Barry?
Oh, yeah. And, like Bill said, Brian was like the greatest guy in the world. I don't think there was a person who didn't like Brian. He was funny. He ribbed people. He was just a good guy. But it was almost like, you bring a guy in and you're phasing Bill out, and the tag team was Axe and Smash, and all of a sudden now Axe is on the side, and you got another guy in here, and it's just not the same tag team. And it had to be just so hard for him to come in and do that, and he did a great job.
Yep.
But the people look at that and they want to see the Demolition.
Yeah.
And it's hard to bring that third person in to do that. So, it was tough on him, but he did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did an incredible job of being able to kind of bounce back from that, reinvent himself, and carve out the solo career that he did. I always felt, and I've said this to Brian numerous times, I always felt that Brian Adams was one of the great big men who, for whatever reason, never really got a bigger push than he did. I always felt like he was so talented and should have done more within the business than he did.